All right. Well, welcome. This is our third episode of our webinar, Beavers and. We've been really enjoying filling in that ellipsis with many different things. This is a new webinar for us, and the series is cultivated by our National Beaver Communications Working Group, which is hosted and facilitated by the Beaver Institute. If you're interested in joining the working group, you can visit our website. I'll actually just drop the link here. You can also get in contact with me to join as well. And there we go. It's in the chat for everybody. But if you weren't here for introductions, I'm Avery Sossman. I am the Communications and Finance Manager with the Beaver Institute. And today I'm very excited to introduce my co-host, Shay Steingast, who is a part of the Communications Working Group and my co-chair as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Avery. My name is Shay Steingass. I'm an environmental project coordinator for Benton County, Oregon, and courtesy professor at Oregon State University. Do you want me to go ahead and launch into our topic today?
Yes, please.
Okay, all right. Well, we have a really amazing topic for you all with some amazing leaders in conservation work here in Oregon. So today we are going to talk about beavers and sea otters. They may seem like very different species, but they actually have a lot more in common than you might think. So for instance, beavers and sea otters both have amazing coats of fur that keep them warm in watery environments. And they're also ecosystem engineers that actually directly change the way that the environments they live in function through a number of methods. They create a more productive and diverse habitat for other species around them. And perhaps more importantly today, both of these species are the center.
Uh-oh, I think we just lost Shay. That's okay. I can pick up where she left off. I think she was about to say that these species, oh, we just gained you back again. We lost you, Shay, but that's okay. I think we just missed you talking a little bit about how both beavers and otters are species that are the center of international conservation efforts after decades of exploitation, which I think we'll get to hear a little bit more about today. But speaking of conservation, I can't let a moment go by or a webinar go by without mentioning that the Beaver Institute is a national nonprofit providing tools and skills for climate resilient communities to coexist alongside beavers. And we're here to steward and embrace beavers across the landscape through our programming and resources. And this webinar series, which there will be more to come, along with our Beaver Core Wetland Professional Training Program, are fundamental parts of our strategy to educate the general public and to expand beaver consciousness and beaver-human coexistence throughout North America. So this series in particular, we're looking at ways to weave different perspectives together from new and surprising angles and ultimately examine beavers and us. So as Shay already explained, today we're talking about beavers and sea otters. And I don't know about you all, I'm assuming you're probably as excited as I am. I can just say, like looking at the pictures that were sent to me got me really amped up for this talk. So I'd like to start by a little introduction of our three panelists today.
Yeah, well, I am very honored to present Michelle St. Martin to introduce her. We've been working together off and on for years, and she is the Marine Conservation Coordinator with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service located in Newport, Oregon. She has over a decade of experience working with marine mammals, including polar bears and sea otters, primarily in Alaska. And Michelle is excited to be working in Oregon and about the opportunities it brings for continued learning and collaboration. So with that, Michelle, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Shay, and thanks for the introduction, and thanks everyone for attending. Holy smokes, this is a great turnout. So I'll share my screen here in a second. All right, can you all see that? Great. All right, so yeah, thanks, Shay, for the introduction. I don't think there's much more to add to that. You know, Appreciate the opportunity to be talking to you all and the Beaver Institute for providing this opportunity to talk to you all about this new topic. And so first off, I just wanted to mention, there is no formal reintroduction proposal at this time. So Fish and Wildlife Service is exploring that idea. And so that's what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about today. So going over a brief overview, our panelists are going to cover a number of topics here. As far as what I'm going to cover from Fish and Wildlife side, it's going to be pretty high level, give everyone time to, talk about all these different things, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the biology of sea otters, their history, their ecosystem role, like Shay mentioned, and then our next steps regarding management considerations. And then I'll pass it over to Peter and Chanel. So first off, let's talk a little bit about the biology. Sea otters belong to the Mustelidae family. They are a weasel. Some of the largest members of that weasel family are sea otters. Sea otters are also some of the smallest marine mammals. So depending on the subspecies of sea otters, they can weigh anywhere between 50 to 100 pounds. And they live to be about 15 years old. 20-year-old can happen, but it's pretty unusual. So I will sprinkle some beaver information in here, but realizing most of you already know this, but so sea otters and beavers are not necessarily related. Beavers are in the rodent family. Again, sea otters are in the weasel family, but they do have, like Shay mentioned, a number of similar sort of aquatic traits, web feet, thick fur, really dense, thick, fatty tails, etc. So generally speaking, sea otters are near shore marine mammals. They can dive, and they have been known to dive up to about 100 meters in depth for foraging. That tends to be adult males, and it's like 330 feet. That's not typical. They're more often in shallower waters between 40 meters or less. And so 130 feet depth is their average diving, and then shallower than that. So they're pretty restricted to the near shore. They do use a variety of different marine habitats. And so anything from sandy bottoms to large boulder fields, they are fine in. They are a carnivore, and they're also a generalist feeder. So they've been known to eat over 150 different species. Some of their primary prey includes things like clams, sea urchins, crabs, some small, slow-moving benthic invertebrates. And so they have a really high metabolic rate. And so because of that, they need to eat a lot. And so they spend a lot of their time, up to 20 to 50% of their day, actually foraging to be able to consume about 20 to 30% of their body weight per day. And so if you think about, say you're 100 pounds, that's about 10 to 15 pizzas a day in body weight. So it's a lot of food. But yeah, sea otters don't have a blubber like other marine mammals. So they rely again on that high metabolism and then their thick coat to keep them warm. So canopy cover is important, but it's not essential for sea otters. They use this canopy cover to do things like resting areas, nursery habitat for pups. So they'll tie themselves up in the kelp, and it's just an easier way of storms and such. They don't have to be swimming in those waters. They're basically anchored. And then canopy cover also helps in some protections from marine predators such as sharks or orcas. So like Shay mentioned, just like beavers, sea otters are also considered a keystone species because of their role in nearshore marine environments. Sea otters are an apex predator, so they're a top predator, and they feed predominantly on, like I mentioned, invertebrates, so things like urchins, So here on the right, there's a picture of purple urchins. And so without sea otters in that environment, purple urchins are then allowed to flourish in the absence of their predator. And then what you get is these high densities of sea urchins that then consume kelp. So urchins are a grazer, so they're going after kelp and other macroalgae. And so if you have an overabundance of sea urchins that are eating this kelp, you have these areas that are called urchin barrens or something. So that's what you see here on the right. So sea otters can help restore ecosystem functions, things that include, things like ecosystem resilience. So because sea otters are this keystone species, they help maintain a balance and are able to maintain the canopy cover and understory by reducing the number of urchins. So this photograph here was taken from a study up in Canada, and it shows the same area 1 year apart after sea otters recolonized an area. So the picture here on the left is this urchin barren. And then within that year, when sea otters came in and started eating on these urchins, kelp forests did start to take hold. I will note this is not like, it's not going to look like this everywhere, but this is one example. So another benefit for sea otters is the benefit to biodiversity in these kelp forests. So this is a different study that was done up in Canada. I'll sort of walk you through it here. So this is looking at an increase or change in biodiversity within a year that sea otters reestablished. So anything above the yellow line is an increase in total biomass of that species. Anything below the yellow line is a decrease of biomass in that species. So if you see on the far left there, lingcod is mentioned, and you'll see that's about 200% increase in total biomass of lingcod when sea otters came back in and started bringing in that kelp forest again. But then you'll also notice that things decreased, such as the large benthic invertebrates like crabs and urchins and such. So all that's below the yellow line, which makes sense. I mean, that's what they're feeding on. So these kelp forests, also help with carbon sequestration. Kelps can absorb carbon from the atmosphere, and in some cases, they can actually absorb more carbon than places like the rainforest. And then lastly, resilience to climate change. Things like mitigating effects by decreasing shoreline erosion. So, you have this kelp bed that takes the brunt of a lot of that wave action or ocean acidification. So again, high level, talk a little bit about the history of sea otters. And so the historical range you'll see is indicated here by that like yellow highlighted band there. So they were once widely distributed everywhere from Japan all the way down to Mexico. But then commercial harvests led to these widespread declines across the area. And so in 1911, when the North Pacific Fur Seal Treaty was signed, sea otters had basically been reduced to 11 isolated populations, and those are indicated here with the red dots. And ultimately, they lost over half of their genetic diversity. And so one thing to note here, so there's multiple areas that they were still found in Alaska, in Japan, but there was only one small area, about 50 otters remained down in Central California. So after that happened. And then there's been further protections given under the Marine Mammal Protection Act that was established in 1972.
Pretty soft.
So in the late 60s and early 70s, translocations started happening from Alaska to some of these areas that were extirpated. So in Canada, Washington, Oregon, not going to go into much detail about that, but here are a few pictures of those efforts up in Alaska, and then some of the sea otters being released on the Pacific coast. So this slide basically looks at reintroduced sea otter populations over time. I just want to give you a few examples to look at some of the successful translocations. And so in 1969, 1970, 70 otters were brought into, 59 otters were brought into Washington. And over a half a century, so 54 years later, we have about 3,000 individuals in Washington now. So another example is here in Southeast Alaska. Over 400 individuals were brought in to Southeast Alaska during roughly that same time period, but they were placed in multiple locations in Southeast. And about 60 years later, that population has grown to about 23,000 individuals. So one thing I do want to note here is I did not include total habitat associated with this graphic, but if anyone's been to Southeast Alaska, it looks very different than the Washington coast. So you have all these bays, it's very shallow. You know, sea otters can move in any direction there. There's a lot of protection versus the Washington coast, which is much more rugged. There's some bays and inlets, but it's not as complex as Southeast Alaska. So it's hard to, I wouldn't even compare the two, but this is just a graphic showing that takes a long time for a population to become truly established. And then one other thing to note, you know, because of all these translocations, we probably have over a third of the total population of sea otters because of those efforts that happened. So again, you know, here's the map looking at historical range indicated by the yellow. But then the purple here is actually the current range. And so if you'll notice, there's about a 900-mile gap on the West Coast that hasn't filled in yet. And this is between Washington to the north and Central California to the south. So why are we even talking about considering reintroduction? So the Fish and Wildlife Service was tasked by Congress in 2021 with taking a look at the feasibility and cost of reintroducing sea otters to the coast. We did that report, and that report was published in July of 2022. And then in this report, it focused on the feasibility, the challenges, and then some of the recommendations of next steps and things to consider going forward if reintroduction, you know, was an option to continue to explore. And so our assessment did indicate that the reintroduction is feasible, and that would result in significant benefits to the species and the ecosystem. But there is additional work that needs to be done to reduce the uncertainty in areas, particularly the socioeconomic impacts. And that feasibility assessment also sort of provided us a framework for our next steps going forward. And so one thing I do want to mention is that in this report, we do not propose reintroduction. We just suggest that there's more information that's needed first before determining whether or not reintroduction should be proposed. So since that time, last summer, we have then taken steps to do sort of these informal engagement with the public to do a lot of information gathering. And so last summer, we held these informal open houses at 16 different communities along the coast, starting at Astoria to the north in Oregon, all the way down to San Francisco. And so this allowed people to come in. Again, it was very informal. I think one person said it was kind of like a science fair. We had multiple tables around with experts at these tables. The tables were different topics. People could come in, ask questions, have one-on-one conversations. I mean, it truly was like a listening, learning experience for us. You let us know what their values were, their opinions and concerns. And so we had over 700 people, close to 800 people attend these. And it was super valuable. So we have a report that's coming out here shortly. It'll be posted to our website that has sort of the outcome from these open houses on what we heard. And so since this, we're continuing to do outreach efforts, and that stuff will be posted on our website, like I mentioned. And there's still multiple efforts underway. I mean, one of them is a project that's being led by multiple organizations who are trying to finalize a sea otter reintroduction model that will identify potential reintroduction sites based on habitat characteristics and logistics. Like I mentioned, we're going to continue to engage with the public and have additional public meetings so that we can listen and learn and understand people's values and concerns and determine what socioeconomic considerations we should be including in these future processes. We're also brainstorming ways with people on potential mitigation strategies. If a proposal for reintroduction were to occur, what does that mean? One example being buying oyster farmers otter-proof gear. These are just ideas that we've heard. So, and then from all of this, conducting a comprehensive socioeconomic impact assessment. So there's a lot of steps, there's a lot of information gathering. I mean, I would say that we're at the starting point still, and we're continuing to learn more and more. And so before all this happens, once we get through these steps, I should say, then we'll determine whether or not there should be a formal proposal to reintroduce sea otters. So as far as the public involvement, how you all can get involved, we do have a website. We do have various updates that go up there. There is a listserv on there that you can easily sign up for. Any future events or public meetings we'll post on there. I'll provide a QR code here in a second. Attend meetings. I mean, we want to hear from everyone. And so understanding people's views, opinions, that's really important to us. Get involved in other organizations. And then of course, feel free to reach out to us directly. I put my email up there. Happy to talk to anyone. So here's a QR code for our website that has additional information, including the full feasibility assessment if you're interested in reading that. And then also a way to sign up for the listserv if you're interested. So with that, I'll say thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That was awesome. And I love ending with that really adorable picture. So much great information there. And I didn't say this before you started, but I think people caught on already. I see some questions flowing in. This goes for everyone. If you're thinking of questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A or in the chat. We will certainly get to as many as we possibly can. Given our time and pacing right now, I thought maybe we would take a couple and then do whatever we can at the end. So Michelle, would you be willing to maybe answer a couple before we move on to the next presentation?
Yes, of course.
Awesome. Yeah. So I was also really appreciating the map. As I had mentioned before, I love maps. So I was really appreciating the map to see the different activity and also the historical map. And there were some questions about that. The first question came in was about a specific location that there was like a flat line at San Nicolas. Is there something in particular that happened there?
Yeah, so there was a reintroduction efforts that happened, I think, in the 90s at St. Nicholas in California there. It was considered a failed reintroduction, but there is a population there that's stable, and it's about 100 and 120 individuals, and that seems to be, it's pretty small islands, I guess I should say, and so the initial introduction that happened is they brought individuals out there, and a lot of them swam back to the mainland. So there was discussions about how that would look in the future, but I do think it's considered successful. There is a small population out there that's been stable, and so that population won't ever get very big, I guess.
Yeah, interesting. I noticed somebody else picked up on something that I also was like, whoa, about, which was the picture of the skins. I was like, that looked massive. So someone wrote in the chat that they looked pretty large and was wondering if the average sea otter weight has been reduced by hunting over time, or if that's something that you've tracked.
That's a great question. Short answer is I don't know. So the southern sea otter is a smaller animal. Those pictures were from northern sea otters, which can get about 5 feet long, 100 pounds, small German Shepherd, basically. I don't know if hunting had an effect on size, but that's a good question.
Yeah, I thought so too. I hadn't thought that. I just thought, wow, wow. And I know you mentioned that some of the information that you're still gathering is about like the socioeconomic impact. There was a question about if there's other information lacking to be able to make an official recommendation.
Yes, so there's quite a bit and it's outlined. One of the things is prey availability at sites and so information about those benthic invertebrates in potential areas. I mean, so our report was sort of broad sweeping at this 900-mile gap, but in there we do list out probably 10 or 12 areas that need to be looked into further.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. There's so many great questions coming in, so I'm just trying to give priority in chronological order, but I'm just going to say one more and then move on to Peter. But I wanted to end on a beaver note very selfishly because we had someone remarking about how in recent studies around beavers, there's been highlighted that there's this tremendous benefit for climate resilience. And so do the studies with sea otters show like similar climate resilient benefits in terms of ecosystem health, biodiversity, etc.?
Yes, there's a number of things that they can do. Obviously, the kelp forest is a huge beneficial characteristic for a number of ways. The coastal erosion, the carbon sequestration, reduced acid acidification in the water column. Sea otters eat invasive species. We know they eat the green crab and this other shrimp down in California too. That's an invasive species, so that's beneficial as those species come into these areas.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And hopefully we can get to some more of those questions shortly, but I want to keep things tracking because we have two other amazing presenters that we want to save time for. And next we're going to hear from Peter Hatch, who is a member of the Confederated Tribe of Siletz Indians and works in the tribe's Cultural Resource Office. He's also the board secretary for the Elakha Alliance and has been fishing, clamming, and crabbing in Lincoln County his entire life and wants to ensure that his descendants can always do the same, which I think is really awesome. So Peter, I would love to hand it over to you. Thank you for being here. Oh, you're muted, Peter. We can see your screen though.
Okay, thank you, Avery, and thank you all. Really nice to be here. Thank you for the kind introduction. As Avery mentioned, I'm a member of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz of Hanas, Kust, and Siuslaw descent among our great big confederation of tribes that were put together onto the same Siletz reservation in the 1850s. I work more on our history side, but I think that a group of people who are coming together for the Beaver Institute will already be able to have a certain inherent empathy for these animals and what they mean on our landscape in the natural world. But I think sometimes it really helps the broader public get a sense of this ecological importance when they understand the dimensions of its human history a little bit. and the stories that go into the deep interactions between humans of whatever background and these animals and their environment. So with that in mind, it's always tricky to figure out a place to begin the story, and I'll have to ask for patience from all of those folks I see in the introductions who are coming from much further away. I am going to be focusing in on the Oregon coast, which is right in the middle of that 800 or 900 mile habitat gap that we face today. That Michelle so ably explained for us. And so I am going to be talking about very specific places. I hope that maybe some of you who are from further on afield will have vacationed on the Oregon coast or something like that, and may or just have your own piece of coastline that you love, that you can that you can imagine as we talk about this. But in telling these stories, it's always hard to figure out where to begin. And I grew up at a time when we had not seen sea otters in the Oregon coast in more than 3 generations. They've been gone completely since about last one we have record of is 12 years before my grandfather was born. And so our baselines have shifted. What we expect out of our environment has shifted as a result. And so to begin the story, I always like to refer to the elders whose knowledge matters a lot to us, and that's to the particular woman on the left of my slide, a Coos woman named Annie Miner Peterson, who lived at Siletz for a little while, but mostly as an adult was back in her own homelands on Coos Bay. And in 1933, a young linguist from the University of Washington was out collecting languages and stories, and spent most of a summer with her collecting both dialects, Hanas and Millet Coos, and many, many, many dozens of her stories that she learned as a child and as a teen. And one that she recorded was about the deep relationship between our own ancestors and the sea otter people. And this story is set in a landscape that's still, even after all this time, kind of pretty darn good for sea otters in the coves and rocky headlands that stretch southward from the mouth of Coos Bay. About a very able and confident and headstrong young woman who refused all human suitors, but one day while swimming becomes, sort of supernaturally pregnant with a baby. For not having a husband, she's expelled by her family. She raises the baby in secret down by the shore, and eventually the father reveals himself to be a head man of the sea otter people, and takes his new family to live out to sea. And they have another son. They live happily, but she realizes, her sons find out that her human family on land is still mourning her. They think that she's dead. And so to formalize the partnership between the sea otter people and human people on land, she takes the robes that transform, that separate sea otter people from human people, and a bunch of other of the 2 canoe loads full of the beautiful things that come from the ocean, and take them back to her human family on shore. Then returns to the ocean, but saying that as long as you see my children, the sea otters, they will help provide for you. They'll bring the good things of the ocean to the people on land. And in a very real way, that's a story told in metaphor, but I think that in some ways that's just one of many examples where contemporary science, we're learning ourselves in the present day to catch up to those ancestral understandings about how we should relate to the environment and to the other beings, non-human beings around us. And so in the particular case of sea otters, and our peoples along the Oregon coast, just like basically everywhere throughout their original range, the people have interacted with them. They are highly, highly valued because as those environmental adaptations that Michelle was talking about, it is the softest, densest fur in nature, and so that the warmest thing that you can make a blanket or a winter robe that comes out of our natural environment. And so robes made of sea otter skins have always been part of the traditional regalia for our peoples along the Oregon coast, and very much part of the traditional economy. A lot of elders being interviewed in the early 20th century talk about them as being part of those very same payments between families to solemnize a marriage up and down the Oregon coast, and we could extend this throughout the habitat gap very easily in the Salish languages and in Tolowa and Yurok and on down the California coast. But just restricting ourselves to Oregon, there are 6 different words in the 6 different indigenous languages for the sea otter. They're well remembered in the language. And the material remains of our folks' life on the landscape, where sea otters come to be incorporated into the middens of shells and other debris of just daily life along the coast. They both demonstrate sea otters' abundance back in the day because of how relatively common they are in the middens, and also through those recorded or those retained bones and teeth of original Oregon sea otters tell us a lot about the facts of their biology when we look into those collections that have been cataloged. There's also a great deal of information that comes from those stories, from those even just vocabularies of languages that folks recorded from our ancestors, from our different families along the coast, about the places that are associated with sea otters, the techniques where and how they were hunted. That really leaves a legacy on the landscape to this day, even generations after they've been gone. One example that I like to talk about is, if we were having this meeting in person, and it looks to be a nice day to go and do it, we could drive out to Otter Rock in Lincoln County, just north of Uquina Head, or we could go to Otter Point on the southern Oregon coast in Curry County. And it was really notable to me when I started to research this that the old place names in their respective indigenous languages for these 2 places just mean Sea Otter Rock. So that demonstrates to me very clearly that at least as long as sea levels have been in the neighborhood of where they are now, these are places where humans and sea otters have interacted, and that comes forward onto our landscape just today. In fact, even though all of the processes of colonization have, deeply transformed the lives of my family, indigenous families, and our records of sea otters are sketchy. And a lot of these elders were being interviewed, 20 years or more after sea otters had been extirpated from the Oregon coast, and more than 50 years after they were extremely, extremely rare. They still record, sites that are associated with them in stories or in their understandings of their home places. And it's remarkable to me that if you plot those on a map against a distribution from a friend of ours, a master's student at Oregon State at that time, who worked up a habitat model for where Oregon sea otters might repopulate if they eventually got to carrying capacity on the whole Oregon coast. It's basically a one-to-one match for all those places that are mentioned in the stories. But as I said, we're confronted with this long history of loss here, and I always come from this quote. One of the early ethnographers, linguists, etc., who was coming around the Siletz Reservation was this guy, Willis Everett, a military doctor in the 1880s. And just mentions casually when he's talking about how our folks dealt with wealth that the highest standard of value that these Indians possess is the skin of the sea otter. At present, there are none among them. Well, that's a very strange thing to be missing what you value most highly. And it's worth talking about how that came to be and putting a little bit of the human history to that story of the contraction of their range that Michelle was talking about. And how it relates to the human history of our region here along the Pacific coast. So I always like to talk about this map here from 1775, just right before the Declaration of Independence, where our whole region, our whole eastern side of the Pacific Ocean is, at least to these map makers, only very vaguely and sketchily known, even at this late date. And sea otters turn out to have a lot to do with how this map gets filled in. Because basically, as the Qing dynasty, a royal family from northern China, from Manchuria, comes to control China, I'm really paraphrasing a lot of great scholarship here, but their woodsy northern tastes with these fur-lined robes get to be the thing to be able to express your imperial prestige with different grades of fur, the highest being sea otter for who can show off the absolute most. So sea otter being reserved for the most elite of the elite. And that creates this tremendous fur boom that echoes all the way across the Pacific, especially when fur traders under Catherine the Great and then Empress Anna of Russia, starting with Vitus Bering, who the Sea and Islands are named after, start to explore out along the Aleutian Islands and realize that, those that survive those very difficult attempts, that one of the things that they can do out there that's highly profitable is to either hunt sea otters themselves or enslave local Unangach Aleut people to hunt for them. And then trade those in ports in China where that's allowed in extremely profitable ways. And so that kind of rolling fur boom that is initiated by the Russians, but that the British and then the Americans and the Spanish within their territories also get involved in, just keeps on rolling through different areas. A lot of the British involvement is centered up in Vancouver Island, on Nootka Sound, where I saw in the introductions that we've got some folks coming in from today, from BC. And it's really notable to me here in the territory, what became the United States, that the first ever American flagged ship that came into our waters in 1788, the first thing they do when they get here is start trading with the local folks, with our local Tillamook people, for sea otter skins. And in the a lot of us, at least in the Western United States, are taught a lot about Lewis and Clark in school. One thing we don't always know is that among those instructions from Thomas Jefferson to Meriwether Lewis about what you're supposed to do when you get there, is to inform yourself whether the furs of those parts can be collected as advantageously as they can by the British at Nootka Sound. So sea otter was very much part of their mission. They made poor Sacagawea there trade her blue beaded belt, one of her last prized possessions, for some sea otter skins with our Chinook folks at the mouth of the Columbia, because they were so broke by the time they had come all the way across the continent. Already by the 1850s, when colonization is really starting to happen in earnest along the Oregon coast, people are talking about sea otters as something that was formerly abundant. This exploitation hits early and has a human cost. I like to bring in here my great grandma Hattie and her father Slelele, or Isaac Martin, who were among my own family, the last generation to really grow up with those last few remaining sea otters, and who really lived life at the sharp edge of that process of colonization on the Oregon coast, being moved in the reducing reservation, being taken from their original homelands without compensation, all of the things that our indigenous families have faced. And where I take that myself is that, as tribal folks, we survived and things like sea otters did not, and that leaves us with a present day responsibility to try to repair this fabric, try to make a place for them in our waters again, and get to a place where this 110-year gap that we have now is a distant memory, that we have a functioning ecosystem, and that this will be just a blip. But we've got a lot to confront, a lot of barriers to clear, and a lot to move on from when this little notice in the Coos Bay Times is the last record we've been able to find of any of Oregon's sea otters. So Michelle very ably talked about the conditions of sea otters at their lowest point at the beginning of the 20th century. I should also mention very briefly that as the Elakha Alliance, as a nonprofit organization that is working on this issue, we also confront a failed reintroduction. So the reintroductions from Alaska in the 1970s that Michelle referred to, they succeeded in Washington, BC, and Southeast Alaska. Eventually, although there were sea otters in Oregon for quite a bit of time, for 11 years, from the 1970s, as a result of those reintroductions, we think eventually that population just got too small to be viable, and they eventually faded away. And so we want to learn the lessons of that failure as we try to bring them back to this place that they have otherwise always been. And we've got some great content for you if you want to check out our website on that particular issue, among many others. We've had a lot of great webinars over time that I welcome you to. That sense of responsibility to repair the fabric is, for me personally, the driving force of my involvement in Elakha Alliance, and for my my late father, Dave Hatch, what was his the founding spark of starting what eventually became the organization when we incorporated in 2018 after his passing. So with that, to talk more about our organization, unless there are some questions we can get to now, I'll hand things off to Chanel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Peter. It was wonderful listening and learning from you. Yeah. We do want to hold questions just momentarily, if that's okay. Great.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Chanel Hason. I'm the Director of Outreach and Community Relations for the Elakha Alliance. And thank you to the Beaver Institute for having us today. And also thanks to my colleagues, Peter and Michelle, for great presentations prior to me. Some of my slides are similar to theirs. So it'll just be that much more ingrained in your brain once you finish this webinar, some of those key facts. So a timeline of sea otters in Oregon. About 2 million years ago, sea otters evolved somewhere near modern day Russia and eventually expanded, as you saw in the great maps from Michelle and Peter, all the way from Baja California up the coast through to Japan. And then about 10,000 years ago, Native Americans arrived to the Pacific Northwest. And as Peter mentioned, sea otters and our tribal folks lived together and were an integral part of the culture. And also specific locations on the Oregon coast, like Otter Rock and Otter Point, are direct translations of the names given to those places by the Tillamook and Tutuni people that lived along the coastline. So we know there is a rich history of sea otters up and down the entire West Coast here on the United States. So who is the Elakha Alliance. We're an organization of tribal conservation, nonprofit, and community leaders and partners with the shared vision of an Oregon coast 50 years from now, where our children and grandchildren can coexist with a thriving sea otter population and a robust and resilient marine ecosystem. As Peter mentioned, his father on the left there was the originator of the idea behind the Elakha Alliance in 1999, and we formally became a nonprofit, 501c3 in April of 2020. And we've got an amazing board of directors, as you can see in the right photograph. And currently we have 4 full-time staff, which is fantastic because I was the first ever employee as of 2 years ago. So it's nice that we've expanded and have the capacity to hire some incredible humans on our team. So our mission is to restore population of sea otters along the Oregon coast, if you did not already catch that drift, and also, most importantly, help our Oregon marine ecosystem become more robust and resilient, because everyone benefits from a healthy ecosystem. And I just want to point out that sea otters aren't the silver bullet. There's no one thing that we can do to help our kelp forests. It's a multifaceted effort, and sea otters are just one piece of that puzzle to help rebuild that huge ecosystem. As Peter and Michelle mentioned previously, there was a translocation of sea otters in Oregon in the early 70s. And unfortunately, we just think that there was not enough animals released to withstand natural immigration and mortality rates. So we've learned a lot from this translocation, and every other translocation of sea otters in different parts of the world have been successful. So we are hopeful now, 50 years later, to eventually have another translocation here in Oregon. So why sea otters? Why now? As you have learned, sea otters are a keystone species, which means they have a disproportionately large effect on their environment relative to their abundance. They have foundational effect on our kelp forest ecosystems, and they are key predators of sea urchins, which right now are left unchecked along much of the West Coast. So without predators eating them, like sea otters and the sunflower sea star, which got taken out several years ago by a wasting disease, we have an imbalance in the ecosystem. And so allowing these sea urchins to overpopulate and just consume kelp forests at an alarming rate. And here are a couple photographs from Cape Violet and Monterey Bay that showcase just how beautiful and also scary it is to have these purple sea urchins demolishing these kelp forests. They are natural to the ecosystem, so they're not the bad guys. It's just kind of the perfect storm scenario where they can go up to a year without ever eating. They turn into kind of a zombie state, as they say. So it's just kind of the worst animal to lack their predators. And so unfortunately, 38% of the world's kelp forests have been in decline over the past 5 decades. And here in Oregon is no different. Our kelp forest here used to span most of the entire coastline from old kelp map data, but now kelp only occupies 1% of our nearshore marine ecosystem. And I want to mention that there is still healthy kelp forests out on the Oregon coast, just not as much as there was historically. And we also know sea otters benefit estuaries based in research in California in the Elkhorn Slough in Monterey Bay area. They have seen with the reintroductions of sea otters there that they are helping that eelgrass ecosystem. It's actually helping the water get clear. It's decreasing coastal erosion by 70% to have these sea otters in that habitat. And this is a little diagram showcasing how that is happening. And thankfully, sea otters are consuming crab, which allows small sea slugs and snails to graze on algae that grows on the eelgrass blades. And so once they take that algae off, the eelgrass can photosynthesize and also sequesters carbon from the atmosphere as well. So super positive. For the Elakha Alliance, this is kind of our strategic plan overview, very simply put. to complete a scientific feasibility assessment and determine if it's feasible to reintroduce sea otters into Oregon, which we've already completed. And then currently we're working on building regional consensus that sea otters are a valuable asset to reintroduce back into Oregon, and then hopefully in the near future proceed with a restoration in carefully chosen sites. So as Michelle mentioned, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did publish a feasibility assessment on reintroduction in Northern California and Oregon. And the Elakha Alliance also published a feasibility study just focused in Oregon on the reintroduction of sea otters with the top 6 sea otter scientists basically in the world. That is available on our website. And we have also published an economic impact assessment and a South Coast tourism impact study showcasing how just bringing sea otters back to the Oregon coast could increase our tourism dollars in Oregon. So you can find all of those on our website. So as Michelle did mention too, it is feasible for sea otters to be reintroduced in Oregon from a biological and ecological perspective, and would produce conservation benefits to the species and the nearshore marine ecosystem, as well as a broad range of ecosystem services. And it's also feasible from a legal state point as well, although there are a few regulatory adjustments that may be desired to increase the likelihood of public acceptance and thus success of the effort. So there are still research and other outreach that needs to be done before we can do a reintroduction. So I want to discuss, there's been several proven successful reintroductions. Past translocations account for roughly 1/3 of the sea otters in existence today and have successfully restored the species in many parts of their historical range. This includes California, where there's a population of about 3,000 currently, Washington State, where there's also about a population of 3,000, and Alaska, where 90% of all the world's sea otters live, which is about 70,000 individuals. So what are the next steps? So currently we are doing a lot of outreach and engagement, so raising awareness of the importance of sea otters as a keystone species, culturally significant for our coastal tribes and economically beneficial for our coastal communities. We have a very robust social media following and accounts, so feel free to follow us on there. You can join our RAF newsletter. We have about 4,000 individuals. We have several events throughout the year as well that are amazing fundraisers, which I'll talk about in the next slide. We also have multiple webinars, presentations in person, and various other events that we table at throughout the coastline. So check our website events page if you want to see what we're doing next. You can hear us on the radio and podcasts. And yeah. Our largest fundraiser of the year is the Oregon Otter Beer Festival. So we get local breweries to make an otter-themed beer using Maris Otter malt. So it's a fun combination of ocean conservation and the love of craft beer here in Oregon. And we have raised over $30,000 from this event alone, which is fantastic, to help continue our outreach and engagement and fund research projects that we are doing right now as well. So our next steps is to gather some more information about the potential positive and negative effects to the ecosystem and people before a sea otter reintroduction takes place. We're also collaborating on a regional scale with our partners at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and our partners in California who are trying to do Northern California reintroduction as well. Filling the science and socioeconomic and policy gaps identified through our feasibility study. And we're currently working on a fisheries impact assessment as well. And also funding shark research. So we are learning where white sharks hang out on the Oregon coast, because we don't want to release a raft of sea otters into a white shark hangout spot that nobody ever knew about. And next up, we are gaining political support. So we need public outreach to your elected officials here in Oregon, letting them know that it's important to you to bring this once native marine mammal back to our waters for the benefit of us all. And finally, increase our tribal engagement and leadership and work with our coastal tribes on a sea otter reintroduction plan and recommendations. So as a director of outreach, I'm going to pitch it one more time to follow us on our social media channels. If you are interested in seeing some of our previous webinars, jump to our YouTube channel. We have our Sea Otter Science Symposium happens every October virtually, where we invite scientists from all over to discuss some really awesome topics. So be sure to check that out. And you can also sign up for our newsletter through our website, which is listed there. I can put it in the chat afterwards as well. And just want to say thank you to our partners. We are an alliance, so that means we work with many hands and work with lots of different nonprofits and government agencies and businesses throughout the state and also across the United States and beyond. So thank you to everyone who supports us. We really appreciate it. And with that, any questions?
Thank you so much, Chanel. This has been an awesome learning experience all around. And I know that you are on a timeline. And so if you do have specific questions for Chanel, note the email that she has listed there so that she can answer them when she has the time to do that. Maybe if you don't mind leaving a little paper trail in the chat of your email, Chanel, that would be great as well, so that we won't hold you up. But I know that there have been a few more questions and we do have a little bit of time left. So I would love to return to some of those, perhaps also starting with my co-host.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great series of talks today. And we have a lot of comments about just a lot of thank yous for all of your work. I just want to read this from Kate Lundquist. Amazing work you're doing, Peter, and everybody. We in California have had to piece together similar historic evidence of beavers to justify their return to places where they've been extirpated. Thank you for all that you're doing to help understand better the historic range of otter. So just so you know, you guys have allies in the beaver community. Really, both species are just so amazing, and a lot of really dedicated folks working to conserve these species. You know, I had a question for you, Peter, specifically, and this is something I think about a lot. I do really enjoy the story of Sea Otter Woman, and we had many folks that said that was really beautiful. Something that struck me when I first heard that story several years ago was the idea of the covenant between humans and wildlife. And science is definitely one side of conservation, but what are some ways you think we could work to better integrate our actual cultural relationships with wild species for better conservation?
You know, that is a huge question that I think we are grappling with in a whole lot of various ways. And I feel like in every conversation about it, and maybe I'm letting my own personal climate anxiety or climate dread, or I've heard people call it various things, but I feel like sort of climate change is like the looming specter in the back of all of these conversations of like what conditions are we going to be facing in, you know, another generation. And there is a lot to be done. I think to me, just you know, finding dimensions of helping people understand that human and wildlife interaction is what human existence has been. You know, I think, unfortunately, you know, and this is another big topic, but like a lot of our founding ideas of conservation, you know, and not to pick on, I don't know, John Muir or whoever, but is an idea of wilderness that is separate from people, as opposed to one that you know, indigenous folks and indeed you know, settler folks, as soon as they came in, have always been interacting with, affecting, changing, and you know, at least ideally maintaining some kind of livable balance with. And you know, we're living at this, you know, tremendous moment of change, and just trying to all, you know, whatever our background, figure out how to live in this environment for the generations to come. And I don't think I have answers here. I just think it's worthwhile to keep thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need any kind of synergy we can get to amplify conversations and perspectives. So I just think it's nice to hear things besides just, you know, data, and talk about the communities that are affected. So yeah.
Yes, and to the commenters, first come, I do want to emphasize that you know, sea otters are, I have focused on sea otters, and they are missing in our environment, so it's important to put the focus, but you could very easily tell the kind of like stories of importance and interaction and relationship that I just as easily about beavers here in Western Oregon, where I know something, and indeed on into throughout all the different lands we love, about their long history of interactions with humans. So I hope if it's a topic of interest to you, maybe you'll dive in personally, and there'll be interesting stuff to learn.
Absolutely. Well, we have one more question, and we have a lot of thank yous, so thank you again. I think this is maybe for anybody. Can you work, this is from Juliet. Can you work with or along the lines of the National Marine Reserve System effort, which has been very successful in educating fishing communities, stakeholders, and others about the importance of protection, including otters? And she said, could you add the reserve system as a partner?
Maybe I can answer.
Yeah, I think that was for you. Yep.
Great point. Yes, we have 5 marine reserves here in Oregon, and we work closely with the groups that do education and awareness for those marine reserves, as well as Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. So we do work with those marine reserves, but it's also beneficial for our California partners as well to tie into the marine reserves down on the Californian coast. So yes, we're all wanting the same healthy ecosystem, nearshore marine ecosystem. So good point.
So
Wonderful.
I think do you see any other questions, Avery?
Yeah, I think we've covered most everything, but I know that there are probably some outstanding questions, and you've all been graciously including your emails in the chat. So thank you for extending the offer for folks to reach out beyond this webinar time together. So yes, thank you for that. And we are coming to a close on our time here together. And so if I may say a few more things, I'm very excited to announce that we are going to be continuing this series. So if you are enjoying figuratively swimming along with us, then please do stay tuned. We're going to be exploring beavers and children in our next episode, and I will have more information coming out on that shortly. And if you're not aware, we are also hosting BeaverCon 2024 in Boulder, Colorado this year. And we are just about to announce some exciting field trips as well. So I'm going to do a shameless plug here in the chat for BeaverCon information. And last but not least, if you are enjoying what we're doing here, please consider donating to the Beaver Institute. We would love to continue this type of programming from now into the future as well. And I just wanted to say a final thank you to our panelists and everyone who participated today. It's so wonderful to learn with you all and to be in a part of these really meaningful conversations. To your point, Peter, maybe we don't have all of the answers, but I think just sharing the space together and talking about it is really a significant start to chip away and, work together to find solutions within our communities. So thank you for being a part of this community today. And thank you all. Hope to see you on the next Beavers and. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.